Well, church family, we're going to talk about walking tonight, walking, and the reason for that is if you've been paying attention in the book of Ephesians, Paul has used the metaphor of walk for how to live so far in chapter 4, and guess what's going to continue into chapter 5? He's going to continue talking about walking. And in fact, the Apostle Paul talks about walking a lot. I think I looked it up earlier today, and it was 30-some times that the Apostle Paul uses the metaphor of walking for living in the New Testament. And so it was a very common theme, and not just with the Apostle Paul, the Apostle John also used walking as a metaphor. And most famous of John's was 1 John 2:6. And I'll actually start with that. I'll start with 1 John 2:6. That was a good one I came across earlier today. I just happened to pick up a book that I had started reading a while back, and that was a scripture in it. And it got me thinking. I was like, well, Paul was talking about walking. And I talked about that, earlier today. And it just got me thinking, well, how many times did the Apostle Paul talk about walking? Let me tell you, that is one of the beautiful things about technology. Now, it's scary. It's extremely scary. And you need to know that I did a lot of research on ChatGPT. I don't like ChatGPT as a teacher, all right? And here's why. Because students don't use it as it ought to be used. They use it to do work for them. And that's the improper use of any tool, right? When you just let it do the work for you and you take the credit for it. The way it ought to be used is to help them do their work as an assistant. And so doing research. So the way I was using it was I was asking those kind of questions. And it's like using a commentary, it's like using a Bible dictionary, it's like using a Strong's Concordance, where it has even the Greek and the Hebrew broken down. And it does all this and compiles it all in this very neat, presentable fashion, and it does it in seconds. It's amazing. But it's scary because, if it gets even better and better, it's going to be so much better than human beings, at some point. And it's not going to need the prompts that we give it. But I used it today for that word study. And it was just amazing how fast, it brought up all this information. But again, that's how the tool ought to be used. But unfortunately, what you're seeing is people letting it do the work for them. And that is an improper use. So like in school, a student using it to conduct research, to find facts, and then from those facts, write their paper. Instead, what do students do? Write my paper. Yeah, and y'all need to know, there are probably pastors that are having it write sermons, and that would be the improper use of it. And so what needs to, from a spiritual standpoint, what we need to really dig deeper than it can go. We need to speak from the heart because it has no heart. It's a brain, but it has no heart. And that, to me, is going to be the difference in how you can pick out who's really speaking from a spirit-led heart and somebody who's just reading a transcript written by a computer. All right? Just a side note. Sorry. What does this verse say? 1 John 2:6. It says, whoever says he abides in him, that is Jesus, ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. Whoever says he abides in him, that means lives in him, in Jesus, ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. So does that mean we are to have the same cadence in our steps? Does that mean that we are to, did Jesus, have some sort of way in which he some sort of gait in which he walked that was unnormal to other people. That's not what it means, is it? It's not saying that Jesus walked with a limp, so we should walk with a limp. It means that we should live as Jesus lived. That's the metaphor. That metaphor is used throughout the New Testament. And Paul loved this metaphor of walking and living. So where do we see it in Ephesians? That's where I want to take us now. So in Ephesians chapter 4 is where we first see it in verse 1. Paul says this. Paul says there, I therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness and with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Paul says here in these verses that we are to walk, that is, live, in a manner worthy of the calling to which we've been called. That's the first instance we see of walking as living here in Ephesians. Turning to verse 17 in that same chapter. So chapter 4, verse 17. That was from this morning's message. And it says this. It says, now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardness of heart. They've become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. So here Paul is saying that this is something we shouldn't do, that we shouldn't walk or live as the Gentiles. And like I said this morning, when he uses the term Gentiles here, he's not just talking about people that were not born Jewish. He's specifically talking about people who don't believe in God, people who are born outside the covenant of grace. As Christians, once we are saved by grace, once we trust and believe in Jesus, we're to live different from the world around us. We're to walk different. All right? And you say, okay, big deal, that's 2 times. Well, guess what? Let's jump ahead. Chapter 5. We have 3 more uses here in chapter 5. So in chapter 5, starting in verse 1, Paul says, therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. I love this verse, and I love how he says, therefore be imitators of God as beloved children. Because what do children, especially like toddler age, what do they love to do? They love to copy people. You know, sometimes, let's be honest, it's annoying when they just when they get in that copycat phase and they just repeat everything you say right back to you, right? But then there's the cute imitation. When, like right now, Collins loves to dress up and pretend. So, and we have, from all the other brothers, we have lots of dress-up clothes. We got construction stuff. We got like a little doctor's outfit. We got a chef's outfit. And so he'll be a chef one minute, acting like he's cooking something up with the little hat on, and then next thing you know, he's got a little stethoscope wrapped around his neck. And he's pretending. But that's what I have in mind, is we're to be like that, but who should we be imitating? We should be imitating God. And how do we imitate God? He says, by walking in love. Well, how do you walk in love? I mean, do you just walk around saying I love you to everything? Do you go on, do you just find a nature trail and just look at creation and all the things that you love? Do you walk down the street and just stop by every one of your neighbors and say how much you love them? It might not be a bad idea, but that's not what he means. He means here that we should live in love, as Christ has loved us and gave himself up for us. So that means that we are to express this sacrificial love in the way that we live our life. So we should be making sacrifices. We should be putting others ahead of ourselves, just like Jesus put us ahead of himself. And we should we should be willing even to suffer if need be to express that love. But it's how we live. That continues, and he mentions it again. So if you'll go down just a little further, let me see, where do we want to start? We'll start at verse 6. It says, "Let no one deceive you with empty words. Because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not become partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord." So here we're told to walk in light. I would encourage walking in light, because if you walk in the dark, you're bound to run into something, or step on a Lego, or bump your toe on the refrigerator, right? But walking in the light. Here we have two metaphors. We have walking for living. We have light for living a life in righteousness, or living a life in truth, living a life in the presence of God, before God and before all men, so that they can see. Because darkness is also talking about walking in the shadows, walking in evil, right? Living there where you don't want your whole life to be seen. It also feels like it means too to be vulnerable, right? Because if you're walking in the light where everybody can see, you're putting yourself out there. Your life is a testimony to others. But again, we see this pattern of the word walk to be a metaphor for how we should live as Christians, and also how we should not live, like in 4:17. There's one more. Continuing on. If you will, look at in chapter 5, verse 15. Paul says here, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise." Here we're told to walk as wise people. And we're to examine our walk. Again, that doesn't mean that you get on a treadmill and you video yourself walking. All right? That's not what he means here when he says, "Look carefully how you walk." He's talking about examining our lives. Do we take time to step back and say, am I living in a manner that's worthy of God? Are the decisions that I'm making right now, are they pleasing to God? Are the choices that I'm making, are they pleasing to God? That's what he means by walk. A few more that aren't in Ephesians. Two that stood out to me that are just quotable verses is in Galatians 5:16. Paul says, "Walk by the Spirit." That we are to walk by the Spirit. And then in 2 Corinthians 5:7, he says, "Walk by faith and not by sight." So I got thinking about this, and some of you may be like, well, okay, Chase, cool, we got it. That's, you know how to use a metaphor. But the thing about it is that I started thinking about even like going back to the Old Testament. Have you ever looked at the list of people after Adam, and you get to a man named Enoch? What does it say about Enoch? He walked with God. He walked with God 365 years, and one day, he just walks home with God. And that's a life well lived. And then when you think about Adam in the garden before sin, what does it say about the relationship of God and Adam? They walked in the coolness of the garden. They walked together. And then I think about the words of Jesus to the disciples. when He calls the disciples, what does He say to them? He says, follow me. That implies He's going to walk ahead of us, and that we can join Him on this journey, that we can join Him on this walk. And then I think about the scripture that says, wide is the road that leads to destruction, but narrow is the path that leads to righteousness. That's something you walk on. I don't know. That was where my mind was this afternoon, was thinking about just this whole theme from Old Testament to New Testament of walking with the Lord. And are you walking with the Lord? And what does walking with the Lord look like? And to me, it's about your daily conduct, how you carry yourself on a day-to-day basis. And to me, that's where faith is expressed in the greatest way. A lot of people look at the great expressions of faith in like the big things that happen, right? You were given an opportunity to go bear witness to this great multitude, or maybe you were, maybe there was some traumatic event in your life, and did you pray in that moment, or did you stand up and proclaim your faith in that moment, or maybe you climbed the heights of some great thing in business or in your career, and did you at the end of that, give Jesus the credit, the honor, and the glory? A lot of people look at those as like the big moments of great expressions of your faith, but I think greater than that is, did you meet with the Lord today? Did you spend time with Him? Today, tomorrow, the day after that? Did you walk with Him? To me, those small little daily steps, those daily activities are more meaningful and really are more impactful for the kingdom than maybe even those bigger things. And they're not that, I'll be honest, sometimes they're more difficult, right? Isn't it more difficult to develop daily habits of faith? And again, when you think about walking, okay, let's think about actually walking, not using it as a metaphor for living. Let's just talk about walking. Most people struggle with physical activity and maintaining that as a rhythm and habit of life. Because think about it. How many people sign up for a gym membership in January? But then by February, they're not paying it again, right? That's why gyms try to sign you up for the yearly plan in January when you're like, I'm going to do this. This is my New Year's resolution, knowing good and well you're not going to come back in those doors February and March. They know you're done, right? I used to work at a gym, okay? And that was it. You got to push the memberships, at that certain time. That's wrong. I don't work for them anymore. But what I'm telling you is that's the way they operate, because they know how people are. But using that as just a picture, the struggle that people struggle with, it's not, necessarily it's the habit that people struggle with. It's developing that habit and maintaining that habit. And isn't that the struggle sometimes when it comes to reading the Bible, or with praying, or with making sure we're in step with the Spirit? We struggle with the habit, but there is great fruit in the habit. There's a great benefit in the habit. And that is the relationship with the Lord that you're developing through that day-to-day activity, through that intimate relationship. There's a lot to be gained in that. And I don't know. I just stopped to think today about, this metaphor of walking. And are we walking in a manner that's pleasing to the Lord? Are we walking with the Spirit? Are we walking in the way in which Jesus walked? As John says, What's y'all's thoughts? But the thing about it is and that's the thing I like about this metaphor is, I don't think it's meant to be difficult. I don't think it's meant to be difficult, because here's the thing. He's not saying run a marathon. He doesn't use that as the metaphor. He doesn't use some higher level activity. Just talking about walking, And let's be honest, Samuel is about to be there, right? At 7 going on 8 months, he's almost there. And I know that it's going to go straight from walking to running. And I'm not looking forward to that, because that's another one I have to, I'm going to have to watch out for. Collins is already trying to bust out the back door, and now I'm going to have 2 of them, at that level. But what I'm saying in that is it's meant to be, I think, living with the Lord and living in relationship with the Lord is meant to be so easy that even a child can do it. But we make it what? We make it hard. We make it difficult. Mm. Mm.